Please join me in making Jen feel very welcome.
Okay, just checking that my mic is all worked. Great. An absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. And I'm actually going to start this morning. Oh, I should do my little clicker. Let's see if that works. I didn't rehearse this beforehand. There we go. I'm going to start with a story. This is a story that takes us to China. And on the day this photo was taken, I'm probably about halfway into a 3-week cycling trip with a group of students. And it's now been 5 days straight of over 35-degree weather. So with my group, we're feeling a little bit hot, a little bit tired, possibly a little bit worse for wear. But on the day this photo was taken, there's a sense of excitement. We're about to arrive to a village where we've been assured there is a family-run restaurant that sells the best dumplings in this region of China. So around 2 p.m. we roll into town and I take out this map. And it's a map that's been given to me by my colleague, a colleague who'd been on this exact same trip only a few years previous. And on this map, he's got like detailed instructions of exactly where to find the dumpling restaurant. So we go on our adventure to try and find the restaurant. And we're possibly, half an hour in, and we're completely lost. This map that we're trying to follow makes absolutely no sense. And suddenly it dawns on us. The reason this map is not making any sense is that there's been so much construction and development, and you can see from this beautifully laid road in this small village, there's been so much construction and development in some of these smaller villages throughout China that the map we're trying to follow is out of date. Makes no sense. Can no longer help navigate us for where we need to be going. And I use this story to start off our discussion today because we quite possibly find ourselves at the same point in education. The educational landscape, and especially in the last couple of years, has changed so much and is changing so much that we need to check in and make sure that the plan that we're following, the map that we have, is still relevant for where we need to be going. And in life professionally, and sometimes personally, we all have a plan, an idea of where we're going. What's important is that we keep checking in from time to time to make sure that the plan that we have in place is still relevant for where we need to be going. And this is increasingly important here in education because we're being asked to consider, as we lead a future of change, we're being asked to consider some really big questions. Questions like, what is the purpose of schooling? How do we best prepare our young people for a future that is really largely unknown? And for us in the room, and virtually, how do we keep ourselves motivated? How do we keep ourselves skilled? How do we find our sense of purpose in this profession that is increasingly becoming more complex and asking us to take on different roles? Experience tells us what was important in the past does tend to shift, evolve, and change. And no one can predict the future, especially a future in education. However, what we can predict with certainty is that there's going to be more change, a shift of priorities, an emergence of opportunities that we can't even yet begin to imagine. Preparing for change is the key for leading a future of change. As Megan said in the introduction, my name is Jen Buchanan and I'm so delighted to talk with you today. Just a little bit of background information. I have spent most of my career, especially this latter half of my career, working internationally, and I've had some opportunity to work in some truly innovative schools. To date, I was trying to count it up last night. I think it's 12 countries that I've worked as an educator in around the world, and then I've gone on to live, work and travel in a further 50 countries. Some of these schools you may have heard of, Green School in Bali, and more recently I was with Think Global School. This is the world's first travelling international boarding school where we live, work and travel in 4 different countries a year. Currently I work with Future Schools, and this is an organisation that really looks around the emerging trends in the future of education and explores those real burning questions about where are we heading, what is the purpose of education. I believe life is it's really defined by those burning questions. You know those questions that get you up each and every day? Those questions that give you a sense of purpose? We're going to look at 3 of those burning questions today in our discussion this morning. But first, let me just unpack with you what is meant by this title, Leading a Future of Change. When we talk about leading a future of change, what we're talking about is moving people from their current state, where they currently find themselves, and you're wanting to take them onto a journey. You want to take them somewhere over here in the future. But change can be really hard. I don't know if you've experienced it. Trying to get people to move with you with your vision, it can be really difficult. So today we're going to explore 3 phases of how we can work with our teams and build their capacity and lead a future of change. We're going to look at the why, the what, and the how. No, the why, where, and how. So why first do we even need to change? What's actually happening? What are some of the truths? What's sitting under the surface in education in Australia? Let's bring it to the top. What is it that we need? Why do we need to even begin to look at this future of change? Secondly, looking at the where. Where is this change actually taking us? You know, naturally when you're asked to go on a journey, you want to know if it's, I don't know, is it better than where I currently am? Can I see myself in that future? What's it going to look like when we get there? And finally, how? How do we go about it? How do we bring our teams across? How do we move people from where they currently are to where we want them to be? So let's start with this first one. Why do we even need to change in education? I like stories. This one takes us to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. When this photo was taken, dressed in my abaya, it's second day into my adventure, where I'm living in Riyadh. I'm working as in a leadership position at the British International School. On the day this photo is taken, despite that big smile, I am feeling huge waves of anxiety. It's the first time I've put my abaya on, and the first time I'm about to leave the compound. So I think it's day 2 or day 3. And Riyadh's an environment that is completely unfamiliar to me. It's new. I'm about to be picked up outside my apartment, and with a group of new colleagues, we're about to go across to the local shopping centre to go on our first supermarket shop. Waves of anxiety. So off we go, we get picked up, we leave the compound, go through the security checks, and we get across to this local shopping centre. And as we pull up outside, we're given a bit of a briefing. The genders now will divide. Men can socialise together, women can socialise together, and the only exception to this rule is the one married couple we have, and as long as they carry their certificate, they'll be right. So I'm like the lone woman in this group. So suddenly I find myself on a solo adventure. Into the shopping centre I go. And at one point I find myself standing up on the second floor, and I'm standing on this balcony of sorts. And I remember standing on this balcony and looking down below me, and it's like a checkerboard. Men in white thobes, women in black abayas. Still feeling a few waves of anxiety at this point, but I do remember standing there on this balcony and thinking, Jen, take this scene in. Like, see this with this kind of high-level perspective that you have at the moment, because within a short period of time, this is going to be every day for you. The familiarity and living in Riyadh, this is going to be your new reality. And that's exactly what happened. Within a very short period of time, I wasn't on the balcony, so to speak. I was completely immersed in the life, the culture, and living in Riyadh. And I share this story with you today to illustrate yet again one of the other complexities that we have in education. The familiarity and the busyness of our everyday keeps us immersed on the ground floor. We can see that balcony, and we know from time to time we need to get up there, because from the balcony we're best able to spot what are the emerging trends happening beyond our immediate environment that we need to be responding to. I often refer to Covey's work, Stephen Covey's work, and he talks about much of the day is important. But it's often the urgent important that takes our attention. And if you're in education, you'll know this well. The report cards that need to be written, the lessons that need to be prepped to, the students that just want to come and speak with us. Crafting time for the important non-urgent really requires discipline and good time management and strategy. Because when we craft the time to get up on the balcony, we can spot that it's not just our students, it's actually all of us that are living in this far more interconnected, global, and far more complex world. So stay with me for some time. We're going to pop up on this balcony and unpack some of the why. What's actually happening in Australian education that we need to be talking about? And there's this perfect storm of dynamics that have taken the conversation around education, especially in Australia, and have elevated it to a whole new level where it really does need to be prioritised strategically, not only for our immediate environment, but for this wider community and for Australia as a country. There's this wonderful quote by Alan Reid. He's out at the University of South Australia. And he says, "The future is not inevitable. It is fashioned by humans who can either allow events and trends to wash over them and respond to the effects, or be proactive and try and shape the outcomes." So some of these kind of dynamics that I'm talking about, they're not easy truths. They're kind of murky kind of conversations that we need to surface. When we're able to surface them, we're best able to understand them and move forward. Australia is one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse countries in the world. So we get to do a little bit of an interactive thing here. 30% of our population in Australia, and here in WA it's even higher, is born overseas. So let's just see how our statistics go. Raise your hand if you are somebody that was born in a country other than Australia. Oh wow, that's way more than 35%. Hold your hands up though, because we're going to keep playing this game. Now you get to put your hand up if you have a parent that was born overseas. So 50% of Australia's population will have at least one parent born overseas. Like, that's a staggering number. Thank you so much. 1 in 4 households in Australia don't actually speak English as a primary language. Staggering. We speak hundreds of different languages across Australia, and here's a really interesting one. Of a population of 25 million, 1 million Australians do not speak English or speak very, very limited English. Our very ancestry in Australia is changing. We are becoming more ethnically and culturally diverse. And yet, despite this, of 39 countries in a recent OECD report, Australia ranks towards the bottom in terms of equity in education. And so what I mean by this is that there is a direct correlation between your socioeconomic background and your performance at school. If you are a young person from a disadvantaged background, you are 5 times more likely to be a low performer than a young person from an advantaged background. And this is when we take into consideration things like language background, whether the school is in an urban or a rural location. There has been many conversations by politicians over the last 20 years to look at mandates, to look at closing that gap. But in real honesty, there's actually been no significant change in that since those reports started in early 2000. In fact, a recent Gonski Institute looked at equality in education and noticed that in Australia, our schools are actually becoming more socially segregated. We're more likely to see people and young people in learning environments where they don't have the opportunity to mix with people from a wide range of backgrounds, which unfortunately is exactly what they need to be able to do. They need to be able to navigate different cultures and backgrounds and perspectives in this increasingly global and interconnected world. We often talk about the fact that we're preparing our young people for jobs of the future. We need to change this rhetoric. We're preparing them for the jobs of today. Already our young people are working in careers and jobs, and you will have experienced this over the conference over these 2 days, already working in careers that we thought were unimaginable to us even just a couple of years ago. To help illustrate this point, I had a look at some conversations with 3 young people that were students of mine at some point within the last 6 years and where their journeys have gone. This is Gede. Gede was a local scholar, a young Indonesian boy who was a student of mine at Green School in Bali. Gede and I jumped on a webinar conversation, I'd say about 6 months ago, and I'm smiling because I didn't quite get the conversation, you'll see why. I'm a Generation X person, and in this conversation, Gede did his absolute best to explain to me the future of blockchain technology and the metaverse for social impact in this education space. He and another student have founded a company, 25100. They are working with another company, a youth-led company in Dubai, to explore exactly this. And he, bless his heart, reached out to me to look at just that intergenerational collaboration. We're still tackling this. Aisha, another student of mine, was at Think Global School with me. She is a photographer. recently featured on a CNN segment, Inside Africa. And in this conversation, she explained how NFTs are being used to empower artists not only across Africa but worldwide to tap into an art movement that simply wasn't accessible and available to them just a few years ago. NFTs allow these artists to have greater autonomy over their artwork, and interesting to this point, the value of NFTs in 2021 was a staggering $41 billion. This is an amount that is approaching the entire value of the fine art market. And finally, this is Clover. Clover Hogan's an Australian girl, a woman that was a student in Green School, Bali with me. She is now a researcher on eco-anxiety. She regularly liaises with Fortune 500 companies on the implications of climate change and business directions. She recently had a TED Talk, not a TEDx, one of the big ones, the actual TED Talks on what to do when climate change feels unstoppable. It's been viewed over 1 million times. And perhaps she articulates it the best. She says, imagine a world where we stopped asking our youngest and brightest just to pick convenient careers and instead started asking them what solutions they wish to work on. About 6 months ago, I was fortunate enough to interview the authors Heather McGowan and Chris Shipley. They're the authors of an amazing book called The Adaptation Advantage. And in this conversation, Heather shared with me that skills learned on the job in the 1980s held their relevance for 3 decades, which was perfect. It was a typical career arc. Skills learned on the job or at university these days, according to the World Economic Forum, have a shelf life of less than 5 years. So it really requires this kind of shift in thinking, because we've already entered a phase of where we need to be ongoing learning just to keep relevant and stay up to date in what we do. And Alvin Toffler, he perhaps said it best. He published a book back in 1970 called Future Shock. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And perhaps the point to start with this is we need to shift our mindset around busyness, because there's still this kind of idea that busyness equals effectiveness. But we need to be able to create the space. We need the cognitive ability. We need the headspace to even be able to understand some of these changes. Have the headspace and the cognitive ability to be able to respond to some of the new data we're being presented with. And perhaps, in this conversation, Heather McGowan, she said it well. This point right here, right now, is the slowest rate of change you will ever experience. It only ever gets faster from here. So with that point, all this change is taking place. Where is it actually taking us? The where part requires a real shift in our thinking. We live in a world where we are saturated in knowledge, and yet we still have a bit of a narrative that schooling takes place from about the age of 5 until 18, and we call this school. But we're in a phase where we're having to embrace ongoing learning. And we live in a world where knowledge is freely available at our fingertips. We're all carrying these devices today, and to Scott's point earlier, you could spend your lifetime many, many times over just on this device watching TED Talks, watching YouTube videos, taking free online courses. So in a world where knowledge is so freely available, it really opens up a wonderful conversation around where do we take education? Despite conversations in the media maybe indicating otherwise, being in education right now is possibly the most exciting time. And us as educators in this room and online there, we get to lead that conversation and we get to lead that direction co-created with the young people we work with. But despite us having all of this technology, I talk about we've got to surface murky dynamics in and be able to have these honest conversations to move forward. We're so connected, and yet we're facing an epidemic here in Australia and worldwide, and we're facing a bit of a loneliness epidemic. Despite being so connected, our young people report at rates of 1 in 2 heightened feelings of loneliness and social isolation. So the where part is about all of us being connected, creating senses of community. As we take people on the journey, it's about being clear with all of the people around us, making sure people feel valued, connected, a sense of belonging. Because when people feel this, when they feel there's a connection to something bigger than themselves, they feel empowered. And when people feel empowered, that's when we really see the influence of positive change. And I perhaps saw this play out no better than a story and a situation in Mumbai, India. It was where I found myself a few years ago. And it's early one morning, I'd gone for a walk to the local market. And as I'm on my walk, I see these group of young children sitting on the side of the road. This young girl being one of them. And they're literally sitting kind of in the dirt on scrap pieces of cardboard. But as I pass, it's something I notice that really shifts my thinking. There's this young woman sitting with them, and she's sitting on a mat, slightly obscured by the sheer number of children surrounding her. And in that moment, I realise what I'm observing is a makeshift classroom. And that was the first time I met Kavita. And so every morning, Kavita, she'd explain to me that she would come in and she would teach these young children the basics of numeracy and literacy. And in doing so, it would give them a far greater chance of being accepted into the local school to continue their education. And I often share this story. I love this story because it really talks to empowerment. It's one thing to have our own vision, but when you look for opportunities to empower those around you, wow, you can affect a ripple effect of change far greater than anything you can achieve on your own. So back to this idea, this burning question. So where is this change taking us? I'm going to share with you 3 shifts that I've noticed over the past few years, 3 shifts that are happening in education. And I share this with you not as kind of an instruction model of here, this is how we do innovation, but I share this far more as a discussion point, just to open the conversation, the dialogue, and to get us thinking about some of the changes taking place around the world. The first we're seeing is a real shift away from the classroom as being a learning space. We're seeing around the world learning spaces becoming far more collaborative. We're seeing learning spaces take advantage of the technology we have so that learning doesn't need to necessarily take place in one place and at one time. We're seeing learning spaces being co-created, where we've got our staff and our students working on some really complex problems that may not just have one simple solution. When you think about it, like classrooms can be really isolating. You shut the front door to that classroom and you've really kind of said, right, this is now my contained space, this happens here and the outside world happens there. Tony Wagner, author of the Global Achievement Gap, and he says it quite well. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. The second shift we're seeing is a shift away from only having subject-based classes. We're seeing a shift to learning that is far more collaborative, and as I mentioned before, you've got your staff working with your students on some really complex problems. Key in this change is making sure that you build the capacity of your people and building the capacity of your staff to be comfortable possibly in a space of ambiguity, being comfortable with not knowing, be comfortable with a sense of vulnerability, because in working in this way, there will not just be one kind of correct answer at the end. It's more of a journey and an exploration. Which leads lovely to this point, is that we're seeing a shift in a mindset to actually how we understand the role of educators. Because like our students, our staff are working in a far more interconnected and global world, and their learning is also taking place, if we think about it, microblogging on Twitter, or maybe we're microblogging on Twitter up until recently, reading and writing on platforms like LinkedIn and Medium. You're attending conferences such as this, whether you're online, going to webinars, listening to podcasts. And so as leading that change, recognising the work that our educators are doing and how they're connected themselves in this far more global world. And when we have this opportunity to learn from each other, especially beyond our immediate environments, it gives us much more clarity and information around actually what's happening out there. Which leads to this last point. How do we get there? This is the big one. This is one I get asked a lot. How do we move our people from here to here? I'm going to... Final story. This one takes us across to Nepal. This was a group called Prisoner Assistance Nepal, and I was there with a group of students on a 3-week service trip. And out of all of my experiences to date, this probably, hand on heart, has been one of the most rewarding experiences. Prisoner Assistance Nepal is run by Indria, and she works with the most vulnerable in the prison system. She goes in and advocates really strongly for education programs for young women that have been incarcerated, and advocates really strongly for daycare for young children under the age of 5, and advocates strongly for keeping them with their families. The work is hard, like tough. And yet Indria has this amazing ability to lead change, to bring her team across. And she's been doing this work for 20 years. So over the 3 weeks with her, I'm just trying to unpack, I'm just trying to understand what it is that keeps her going. How does somebody just turn up and just every day just doing this really hard work? And I'm possibly we're getting towards the final night, and we're sitting in this courtyard of sorts. If anyone's been to Kathmandu, you know, the noise and chaos. We're in the middle is kind of like this little fire going. We're sitting around, cups of chai, and in the background there's dogs barking and children screaming. It's chaos. Anyway, I find myself sitting next to Indria, and I go in and I ask her again. I have this opportunity. I'm just kind of like still trying to unpack this. Indria, what is it that just keeps you going? And she looks at me, and there's kind of like this moment of silence, and she leans in and she just kind of grabs my hand, and this gentle smile, and she just says, Jen, I just see the work that needs to be done. At Future Schools, we often get to go into schools that are really grappling with this question around how we move schools forward. One of the frameworks we use is about finding balance between the structural, the social, and the individual parts of our organisation. I don't know if you found this, but we find that schools are often very good at the structural part, putting in a new policy, new timetable, new procedures. You may have experienced this. Finding balance, though, between all three is imperative to being able to lead a future of change. The social part talks about us, the people in the organisation. What are the organisational stories, the ways we work together, the beliefs and worldviews held by our people? There's a really wonderful quote by Peter Drucker, and he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what he's talking about here is the human element. If your people are not on board, it's really hard to kind of move them forward. And the final piece of this puzzle is the individual part. This is us as individuals. How do you show up? What are the mindsets and the beliefs that you hold around education? What are the behaviours? And actually, what are the decisions and the actions you put in place each and every day? Finding balance between all of these three, again, as I mentioned before, is imperative for being able to lead a future of change. Last and final story, still in Nepal with me. I'm on my kind of last couple of days with our students, and we're down at Chitwan National Park. We're about to go down to the local river and go and wash some elephants, you know, the things you do as an educator. So on this morning, I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for my students to come and join me, and I go to stand up. And as I stand up, I notice there's something drastically wrong. My foot is like stuck to my flip-flop. And I look down at my lower leg, and it's become a feeding ground to a slither of leeches. So if you are ever at a quiz night and you need to know the collective noun for a leech, it is a slither. Just think back on this talk, you are welcome. So there I am. It's kind of determined at this point, possibly going to wash elephants is not the right thing to do. I'm left behind. Off they go. And suddenly, for the first time in 3 weeks, I'm like, you beauty, I've got free time. And I think I'm going to use this very wisely. So I wander into the local kind of shopping strip, and there's exactly one cafe. It's closed. And there's this bookshop. So I wander into the bookshop, and on the top shelf is this book. And this book has become invaluable to me over the years for really understanding what it is about people like Indria in Nepal or Kavita in Mumbai. What it is about these people that kind of go beyond just the talking and actually put some action down and lead that change. I'm going to share with you 5 ideas from this book to finish up our talk today. The first, these people are always questioning the unquestionable. And in coming to talk with you this morning, my intention was not necessarily to come here and give you answers. My intention was to come here and create the space for us to be able to question. The second is looking for opportunity, and key in this is not getting caught on those perceived stumbling blocks, not getting caught on the convention of just like, this is how it's always been done, or this is how it should be done. Which leads to the next point of building a culture of experimentation with our people. When somebody comes to us with a great idea, it's yeah, love it. How can we take that idea and scale it so that we can have more impact? Which requires really leading with courage. It's about recognising the system that we're all part of and just kind of questioning, how can I improve and change? But more importantly, it's about looking to the people around us of how can I bring them on the journey by empowering them to realise their own vision. And it comes to this point, the last point. It's about building community. And as I said earlier, we can hold our own vision, absolutely. But look for people that will challenge, people that hold different worldviews and perspectives from different cultures. Bring them into the conversation to challenge your own thoughts and to give more clarity around why you may have your opinions. Look for opportunity to empower those around you and create a collective vision, because together we can create something quite amazing when we lead this change. And that's where we find ourselves today. In leading a future of change, is about building the capacity of our people by being clear through the 3 stages of understanding why we need to change, where the change is taking us, and how will we get there. Little last point though. Not all journeys go exactly to plan. We never ever did find the dumpling restaurant. But we did have a wonderful laugh as this wonderful woman tried to convince the lifelong vegetarian to come and have dinner in her restaurant. So in leading a future change, a final thought, I'd like us today to consider how we, and that's the big human we, can create an education for tomorrow that is more human-centred, rich in fulfilment, joy, purpose and belonging, where every young person feels they can thrive and where every staff member feels empowered in the work that they do. I do have, we've covered a lot today, and some of these key points, a little bit of fun later on. These cards are made as augmented reality, and on the back there's a little instruction there. If you want to download the app, you can then take this on and use it with your own classes. But yes, 3 little ideas there, and there's also some information on the back there if you would like to connect with me. My name is Jen Buchanan. It's been a delight to talk to you this morning. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Jen. Oh, we might just keep you up here for some questions, if that's all right. I believe
yes.
we've got some time. For everyone, we do have some time for questions. So head to canva.live on your devices, enter the code 188261 to ask any questions you have for Jen. Again, they can be anonymous, or you can attach your name to those questions as well, and we'll get those coming through. But Jen, thank you so much. That was such a brilliant way to start day 2, and I'm in awe. I'm just like, I want to be Jen. Like, I don't know if I want to be you or want to be best friends with you, but oh my gosh. I guess my question for you, though, as our audience is thinking of some questions for you, my first one would be change fatigue. Now, I know one of the things that came up yesterday is sometimes like we can feel change fatigue as those leaders of change, or the people we're working with can sort of feel that fatigue of things are always changing. You seem like someone that is just like high on life. Like you're so positive, so excited, and you've had so much change through your career. How have you dealt with change fatigue and sort of kept that positive outlook, kept yourself feeling energized when there is so much change going on?
That's a really good question. I might be a little controversial here. I just think we do hear about change fatigue, but the reality is we are in a world of continuous change. And I remember hearing a conversation the other day, and I'm just going to share this. This was one in a staff room. And I'd walked in, just to give you a bit of background, I teach ceramics on a Wednesday afternoon. There we go. I go and teach wheel throwing. So there's another part. So I was in the school on Wednesday afternoon and gone to get a cup of tea, and I could hear them talking in the staff room around, oh God, the leadership team don't know what they're doing. just constant change. And I thought, just keep making your cup of tea. But I guess that's it. If you're in leadership as well, there's a change in leadership. Leaders today will be in a space of vulnerability. And your leaders, your people that are in management, will be in a space of not knowing. So first, probably just recognising the role is really complex and it's shifting for them. So possibly that sense of change that you're experiencing in your roles, it's being experienced at all levels of the organisation, and maybe we need to be a little bit more honest in surfacing that conversation. I strongly encourage, read The Adaptation Advantage by Heather McGowan, because it really does talk about our changing roles. We need to be letting go of just having workplace identities. So for myself, as a Generation X, for many, many years, I saw myself as the visual arts teacher or the media teacher. And that role now, when I get asked what I do, is kind of really shifting. Not as attached to that role definition as I was in the past. And that's what I'd encourage people to think about, of all the skills you bring into your skill set. You're not attached to an identity, because if you see yourself as just the visual arts teacher, you're in a space now where you are going to be asked to kind of really consider the complexity of your role. You'll be noticing that it's starting to shift. And that was that key point I said, is about building our capacity to understand that change, building our capacity to be possibly comfortable with the changes, and that comes with vulnerability and not knowing and a few other things. So it's kind of a roundabout kind of answer, but I hope it makes some sort of sense.
No, I love that. I think that's fantastic. Being flexible, being fluid. We do have a question from our audience. How do we support teachers to be vulnerable and comfortable in those spaces of ambiguity, especially since previously teachers have been masters of their domain? Any thoughts on that one, Jen?
I'm going to use an example of this, because when I was at Think Global School, I arrived and we were teaching the IB, and I was quite comfortable with the IB. I knew the curriculum very well, and I had my hard drive full of lesson plans. I was well prepared. As I arrived, we moved across to a Changemaker curriculum. Within the space of 6 months, we went to entirely project place-based learning, inquiry-based learning. There was no IB. And one of my very first modules, we were actually in San Francisco, and we were looking at, it's even beyond my thinking now, but we were creating apps and looking at creating virtual spaces, and I was just like, wow, this is way beyond anything I know. And I went through these huge waves of that's it, I'm going home. This is too hard. I'll go back to Perth. But no, stuck with it, and I think what I recognised was just this really good leadership in just kind of reinforcing that you don't need to know the answer. You're on a journey with the students. It's a real shift in kind of co-creation and collaboration. And that support of the leadership of moving away, you're not looking for exam results. You're not being that's not what we value. It's about, and possibly to that point of just what we value now is building these relationships and building this sense of real co-creation in our learning. But I'm going to say as well, this kind of culture change, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that's constantly having to be revisited and supported. It's, strong mentorships in schools. If you're in a space where you can have some coaching, spaces to come together and actually talk about this, leaving a teacher on their own kind of over there, now you're going to do inquiry-based learning and looking at developing an app. That's a pretty hard ask. So it's got to be supported.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And I think we have time for one more question. What was the name of the book in Nepal?
Oh my goodness, this is I love this book. So The Innovator's Guide to DNA. I have a whole list of books. If you want to know if you get in contact with me, the one that I would really encourage is the Heather McGowan one that shifted everything. There's a wonderful book that's just been published by Valerie Hannon, Future School, and that looks at some of the design principles that sit underneath some of the most innovative learning environments. I'm not going to say schools, but learning environments around the world. But if you would like to know any of the books that I'm reading or any of the people that I'm following, please do get in contact. I even bought little business cards, which was, I'm so surprised I remembered to pack them. But I do. If you want to do that, come and see me after and we can continue the conversation, and I'm more than happy to share some of these resources with you.
Fantastic. We might start an Innovation Festival book club for 2023.
Great idea.
Watch this space. Can you all join me in giving Jen another massive round of applause?
Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Cheers.